Hey everyone, welcome to the Meru Media podcast. I am joined today by, I have had a comedian on before, and now we have another one on, another Dharmic comedian, but he's got a couple other podcasts called Mango Bae, and then now the new Shakti Punch. It's welcome Pranav Behari. Pranav, how are you? Namaste,
Namaste.
namaskar. And
Namaste.
actually belated Vijayadashmi, right? Or Dussehra. It was,
Yes,
yeah.
happy Vijayadashmi, Dussehra, whatever you like to call it, indeed.
Yeah, you and I have been trying to connect for I don't know, months now, must be at least.
Months.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, you've been super busy. You've been busy with your various podcasts and traveling, work, and so
Yeah,
on. And I've been traveling and work and family
definitely.
life. So sometimes it's just tough to get these moments to happen. But I guess
Also,
you
two
got
different
us.
time zones,
Yeah,
that's
yeah, yeah.
in the works.
And I didn't even think about it, but when we booked this, it was like right after Vijayadashmi. So I was like, hey, this is actually kind of cool. It's a good sign, a good start to move all this forward.
Absolutely. Very auspicious.
Yeah, yeah. So how you been? How's life been treating you? How's work coming along?
Uh, things are great, man. Things are great. I'm a busy guy.
Yeah.
Obviously, I'm a working stand-up comic in New York, so I'm pretty occupied with that throughout the week. On top of that, I have a podcast, Mango Bae, which you know about. That's a purely comedic podcast, and now I've recently launched another podcast called Shucky Punch. It's really more of a YouTube show. And then on top of that, I also have like a web series I've been promoting and taking out onto the festival circuit and doing meetings and stuff like that for. So
What's that one called? The web series?
that's called Problematic.
Okay, what's that about? If you like to talk about it yet?
Problematic. Yeah, problematic. The broad strokes of it is a satire. It's a kind of workplace satire about woke culture and just kind of culture and where we're at in general.
Yeah.
It's about an aspiring writer journalist. She's kind of a scold, right? An aging millennial scold who's trying to get her leg up in the business, and
Right.
she's everywhere. But then, out of nowhere, she kind of goes viral for getting into a fight with a finance guy on the street,
Right.
and is viral for that. So she's navigating that in her kind of new ascendance in the workplace and on social media and stuff like that. It's a very funny show, and I think it's going to be premiering on the web next year, and then
Okay.
hopefully, I think the indications are looking good for where it's going to go beyond that, but no need to get ahead of myself. But it's very funny, something very close to my heart, and my co-creator's heart, and yeah, it's been great. It's been a blessed process making that. Very difficult, I mean, very challenging process, but very
Sure.
rewarding. So yeah, we
Are you acting? Did you write it, direct it,
I
acted it, or
I
did you?
I was the writer, co-creator. I'm in one episode. I have a bit part in one episode. Um, and yeah, this is just for the web series. And so that's really just been finding its legs now this year. We wrapped at the end of last year, and we first took it to Series Fest in Denver, which is a great
Mhm.
festival if anybody's ever heard of it. And we won the best digital series category there, and since then we've just been doing more and more festivals, and yeah, we're very excited.
That's awesome. So hey, when it comes out live or whatever, we can watch it. Let us know. I'm definitely
Definitely,
down to
for
check it
sure.
out.
Yeah. I
Yes.
won't be, I won't be shy. I won't be quiet about that. Yeah.
I doubt it. No, so Pranav, like on this podcast, we spend a lot of time going over people's background because I do think it's important
Definitely.
for people to kind of talk about their journey because like Hinduism, the Dharmic traditions are not simply a doctrinal system, right? It's on you believe X and that's it. It's a way that your life functions, and there's a path that usually your life takes to get there. So, what was your path, and what's your like story to get where you
Ooh, wow. I was just born in central Pennsylvania, a kind of a very suburban community that I grew up in, and there was a fair amount of Indians there because it was near the capital,
are? Yeah.
and Indians are everywhere, and I um I don't know, I was a sort of wild kid. I was not a good Indian kid. Um, I got into a lot of trouble growing up. I hated school. Um, I was horrible in school, and I got into a lot of trouble, but I was never malicious trouble. My brother, when at some point described as I was kind of an impish character in that
Okay.
not harmful, never intentionally causing harm, but just kind of mischievous and that kind of thing. And at the same time though, I was very autodidactic, even though I didn't like school. And so everything that was on the bookshelves in our house, I would be
Mhm.
reading voraciously. I wouldn't necessarily be reading the things assigned to me in school, but I would be pulling
Yeah.
things off the shelves. And, I remember my brother would be taking Latin. My brother was 6 years older. I'd look at these little Latin books that he would have, and I would start reading. I'm like, this is kind of cool. I don't know what this is, but I started getting into Latin, and then I started getting into those kind of classics of Greek and Roman mythology and stuff like that. Now, concurrent to that, I was also um reading a lot of I don't know if you're familiar with these Rajgopalachari Ramayana and Mahabharata.
Yeah. Yeah.
Iconic yellow Ramayana and
Yes.
Mahabharata,
The
and
abridged ones. Yeah, they're
yes, the
abridged. Yeah.
abridged ones. And so, at the age of like 8, 9, I started reading them, and I was like, this is sick. This is
Yeah.
amazing. And something just stirred in me. And I was always really into actually being a Hindu kid.
Yeah.
Like I don't know what it was. There's no real rhyme or reason around it, but I was into doing puja when I was a young kid. I had my own puja set up, and which is weird because on the other hand, I was not like a very pious personality. You know what I mean? Like I was a little shithead, really. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
But like I'm reading all these things and I'm like really into Bajrang Bali and I'm really into Mahadeva, and I have these pictures up and they're like the rock stars in my life. I'm like, this is sick. I pictured them up in my locker and stuff like that at school. And I was just really immersed in that stuff for by my own hand. My parents were pretty devout Hindus, but they never forced
Right.
anything in my throat, right? And they were never part of any particular sampradaya. They weren't part of Chinmaya mission or BAPS or anything like that, right? They were
Mhm.
just kind of workaday Hindus, right? I
Right.
think my dad is like Aryar Brahmo Samaj or something like that. And my mom is just generically Sanatana Dharma, And now, of course, they're both big Shirdi Sai Baba people. Um, and but they never really rammed it down my throat. So I've always been curious as to like, well, why am I like this? My brother's not into any of this,
Right.
Great
Interesting.
guy, and none of my friends were into this stuff either. And it's so funny as an adult, I talked to some comedian friends of mine, and one of my friends, she was like, what's funny about you? She's like, you're the only person I know who is still really into the religion that they were raised in. And I was like,
Hmm.
yeah, that is a little bit bizarre. I don't know anybody else who's like that. It's very easy, especially in America. You are really inculcated from an early age to be very cynical about religion via the media,
Right.
and but to me, and this is a bit of a flex, but I'm like, yeah, but that's those religions, Our religion is
Yeah.
like it kind of slaps, you know what I mean? And um I don't know, man. I was a troublemaker, and I somehow managed to get into college because I did very well on the SATs,
Right.
and it's because of being an autodidactic person, you know what I mean? My literacy was always pretty high, so I scored perfectly on the verbal, and then I scored kind of mid on the math, but that was enough to get me into a bunch of colleges, and I got into college, and then after that I started taking education more seriously. But at this whole time, I'm like a very funny kid,
Right.
this is how I kind of want to connect this a little bit to my own Svadharma or Svabhava,
Right.
like ever since I was a little kid, I was also making little recordings of myself doing sketches, and it was just for my own amusement, But my brother and his friends, they're 6, 7 years older. They're finding these tapes and they're going off and like they're like smoking pot and listening to these tapes, and they're like cracking up
Did you just
after
dox your brother? Did you just dox your brother for pot smoking?
what's that?
You just doxed your brother for pot smoking?
Well, he's 16, 17 years old at the time, I guess. And him and all his friends are listening to these and they're like, this is actually legitimately funny stuff. And so I was always, kind of reinforced. My parents were always kind of funny people too, My
Right.
dad's pretty witty and he's got the timing. My mom's a big personality, and a storyteller. And comedy was always kind of important in our family. Like we really liked to joke around a lot. We loved watching comedy movies and stuff
Yeah.
like that. And my dad came over from India and he had, I don't know if you remember Mad Magazine.
Oh yeah, yeah, of course.
but he would have these mad books that he brought over from India, and I would just like read these. And then at school, they would have mad magazines in the library for some reason. I would just read those, and I was just always into comedy. I was always a funny guy. At the end of the little Indian parties at night, they would trot me out at like 2 in the morning, after everyone's done playing Teen Putty or whatever, and they'd be like, "Hey, do an impression, do Pat Sajak or something dumb like that," something that we've seen on TV that I used to just mimic, and then I would do these impressions for them, and everybody would laugh, and it would be funny, and so comedy has always been the kind of guiding engine of my personality and who I am in life. It's the thing that has gotten me into trouble, but it's also gotten me out of trouble. My
Yeah,
mom
yeah, yeah.
chasing me around the house because I said some out of pocket shit, and then I would very quickly diffuse the situation by making another joke, and she would be laughing then.
Yeah, yeah.
And so it's always been the thing that's prevailingly gotten me in and out of trouble throughout my life. And at the end of college, I was like taking the LSATs and stuff, and I was like, oh, I guess I'll be a lawyer or something, right? My brother's the doctor, and they were like, well, this kid doesn't shut the hell up. Like, maybe he should just be a lawyer. So I was pushed into that. But then something happened. Somebody had randomly sent me a job posting for Mad Magazine,
Uh-huh.
and it was like, oh, here's like a paid internship at Mad Magazine. And you had to send them some funny jokes or whatever, right? And I just like didn't think about it. I just did it and I sent it off. And then I randomly got it. And I got a job and I started working at Mad. And, X, Y, and Z, next to one thing leads to another. And then I'd kind of put away comedy. I didn't think it was like a practical thing, right? I was like, well,
Right.
I should think about something more serious. I should be a more serious person. So I was like, okay, well, you're a very good writer and this and that. Maybe you should pursue a path more towards literature or something like that. So I went and did a master's. I went to Columbia and did a master's there. And I was just kind of bopping around doing kind of various creative jobs and figuring it out. And something happened then where my mom's health started to give out, and I ended up donating one of my kidneys to my mom. And after that, something in me clicked where I was like, you need to go and do stand-up comedy. You at least need to try it and
Yeah.
get it out of your system because you need to do something that is truly you. And I remember I did it, and I, I when I first went in, I was like, oh, I'm just gonna try this. But I went to an open mic. I went to my first open mic, and as soon as I got off stage, I was like, I am gonna do that probably until I'm dead. I was like, this is what I'm gonna be doing now. And I thought, at first when I thought, I was like, you're just gonna do this, but you're gonna really pay attention to these other things you're doing, like trying to write a novel and try to be this and that and the other thing.
Did
But
you
within
bomb, by the way, the first time you went up? Did you
what's
do
that?
well when you first went up?
I
Did you?
did very well. Yeah, I did
Okay.
very well.
Do you
And
think it would have been different if you bombed? If you came out and you're like, just got booed, do you think your response to that would have been different?
that's a great question. That's a great question. And I guess the only way I can make sense of that is that the second time I went up, I bombed my ass off. I bombed my ass off. But by that point, I was like, this is just the game. This is what it
Yeah.
is. You know what I mean? This is life, and this is how it's going to be no matter what. And I actually enjoyed this. I felt like I had found my tribe, and I felt like this was my dharma actually, right? My
Yeah, yeah.
personal dharma, and I was like, you're just going to do this, man. This is it. And honestly, everything in my life really clicked into place after doing that, and it was extremely affirming of the decision. Just everything about me, my personality, relationships that I had
Sure.
had at the time, which were not healthy or good, all fell away in a very natural way, in an easy way. Money started to flow into my life in unexpected ways, and I was just like, this is it. You know what I mean? It
Right.
helped me. And meanwhile, I don't want to stray too far from discussing Dharma and discussing
No, no,
uh,
no. This is all part
Dharma.
of the mix, right?
This is all part of it. But I'd say uh, uh, I had started rereading the Bhagavad Gita as well,
Mhm.
well prior to this. And
Was it
prior,
as it is? Did you
what's
read
that?
Bhagavad Gita as was it the Bhagavad Gita as it is or a
No,
different version?
you know what I first started reading? It was just an app. It was just a
Interesting.
Bhagavad Gita app, and it was like the English was janky, but it was still like highly, extremely compelling.
Right, right, right.
And I'm reading this, and I was just like, "Holy shit!" I'm like, because I'd still been doing like puja and stuff like that,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
doing pranayama and stuff like that. But I had not really been engaging the philosophy at all.
Right,
Uh, I'd really just been engaging the itihasas, the ritual practices, things like that, for no even discernible reason within myself. I was just doing
right.
it. And after I remember reading the Gita, and I was just like, holy shit, like this is the most switched on shit I've ever read in my life. I felt myself activated in a whole new way. And
Yeah,
I feel like it was reading that, and then that kind of reinvigorated my practice of meditation. I started taking that very seriously, right? I was like, well, I don't have a guru, I'm going to do TM, just do that. And I then, that's when things started to culminate, and I started doing stand up. And that's why I feel like it was very much related to engaging Dharma on a philosophical, scriptural level that
right.
really activated it. And I don't think scriptural stuff is stuff that is purely intellectual. I think when you're reading the
No.
things, they are affecting you in ways that you have no idea about, you
Yeah,
know. Like
yeah.
you cannot always immediately apprehend them. It goes way beyond the words, and it goes way beyond my own mental or intellectual comprehension of a thing. But there is a very activating property to just reading the scriptures themselves. Um,
Yeah,
so
yeah. I mean, so if I can, I mean, we'll come back. There's a few points in I kind of want to talk about in your journey, right? So like, it's interesting to me because the parallel on my end is growing up in here in Southern California. There weren't Indians, but there weren't many. So I was always you were kind of like proud of being what you were. I was the opposite. Like I would go and because my parents were religious. My dad was very, very religious, so I learned Sandhya Vandanam and all the Sanskrit slokas and mantras from a young age. So,
yeah,
but he'd also make me wear a tilak every day, right? So I'd go to school with so I don't know if you know the Vaishnavite one, the one that just the
yeah,
line that goes all the way
of
up.
course.
So I wore that, and then so I remember every day at school I'll be trying to outside my school just trying to rub it off because people would make fun of you all the time. Oh, is your
Yeah,
forehead bleeding? Is your whatever? And I was the only Indian kid, or one of only two or three Indian kids in all my from like grade school all the way up to like almost
right.
college, right? So it's a very different experience for me. Like I grew up deeply involved in the tradition, getting Amachitra Kathas, reading all those. I had a bunch, all of them, right? Mahabharata series, everything. So it's such a very different. But then, like my parents' life, they were also part of the Indian community here, so we learned music and dance. But that was such like a different like cut off life for me. Like I
Yeah.
would go here and do this and be Indian, and then go to school and not be Indian. And it was like, did you ever feel that at all or no?
Definitely. I mean, because I grew up in a very, it's central Pennsylvania, right? Like, I feel
Yeah,
like even it's probably less Indians than Southern California, because I had a lot of cousins actually in LA and Orange County
yeah,
and stuff like that, and they had a pretty sizable community for themselves, right? And for us, it was very, there was like a handful of Indians that I knew, but
right.
in school, I was the only Indian, right?
Okay.
And what I think is actually what another thing that had a really profound impact on me was the ability to go to India during the summers. Every other
Mm-hmm.
year, go to India. My mom would take my brother and I to India for like 3 months, and you know what? We were going to a lot of temples,
Yeah,
right? And I was, of course, reading a ton of Amar Chitra Kathas. I cannot at all elide the fact or ignore the fact that that also had a huge impact on me.
oh
It's
yeah,
not just reading just the Hindu stuff; it's also reading about Guru Nanak and stuff like that.
yeah, yeah. Twinkle.
All of that. But going to India, and I remember my uncle at the time was in the IAS, so he would be transferred around from different places in Madhya Pradesh. And I just remember during the day, they're like, well, what are we going to do with these two kids? You know what I mean? There's only so much summer schoolwork we can have them do.
Right.
And, there's only so many kites they can try to fly. You know what I mean? So they would send us out, you know, put us in a car with a driver, and they would just take us to different temples. And I
Yeah.
remember Sanchi, which I don't know if you're familiar with Sanchi.
Of course, Sanchi. Yeah.
And I remember going there as a kid, and I was just floored. I was
Oh
like,
yeah.
gosh, this is unbelievable. And I'm only 8, 9 years old, maybe 10, 11 years old actually. But I am just like absolutely entranced by Sanchi. I'm like, this is
Right.
beautiful. This is just these roving hills, and there's monkeys everywhere, and these huge stupas, and they're huge to me at the time. I feel like if I were to go
Yeah.
back, it might not seem as massive, right? Um, but I remember, and it wasn't just going to Sanchi. I remember the drive there, and then the drive back, where we're cruising through the countryside and we're stopping at little mandirs along the way. And these are medieval, some of them ancient shrines, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And we're going into we're stopping at some random shrine, which is it's just really it's more like ruins, but they've got the I forget what you call it. They've got like a sacred little pool of water there, but
Yeah, the tirta. Yeah.
right, and it's like filled with algae and stuff, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? And there's like one like sadhu there who's hanging out there with his dog, you know what I mean? Just kind of being the guy, the resident spirit of that place in many
Yeah.
ways. But something about it really got its hooks in me and in my imagination. And I don't know what it is that's within me that responded in these ways to it, right? Because like my brother isn't that much older than me, was I'm sure he appreciated it, but it wasn't, he was like, yeah, whatever. Or my cousins for that matter, in
Right.
India. Um, Going to some of these temples, which some of them were really pretty magnificent given how old they were and stuff like
Mhm.
that. And it just really had a profound impact on me where I'm like, there's something special about this that I couldn't put my
Right.
finger on, but I just felt that um kind of divine inspiration from that, and I
Yeah.
felt
Yeah.
this energy about it and I loved it. And so I felt like that informed a lot of it because, when I was a kid and I was in school, yeah, I was the only Indian kid in my class sometimes, right? I might have been a handful, three Indians out of
Right.
our whole school. But I was also a funny guy, right? I was a funny kid. And when you're a troublemaker in school, that gives you a certain kind of clout,
It does. Yeah. Yeah.
And so I never felt like threatened really, because anybody who wanted to try and make fun of me, I was like, I will turn you into rags, my friend, with my, you know what I mean? Like I was very witty and very funny, and that's what I was known for, was being a funny troublemaker kid.
Yeah.
And so I never had to experience that same sense of fear, right? There would be things like,
Yeah.
my mom brings Indian food for the whole class, and people are like, what is this? This is gross or whatever. Or on some special day, I'm wearing a kurta pajama to school, and people want to laugh about it. But I'm like, I really felt very assured of myself for some reason in that cultural way.
No, that's really cool, man. I do appreciate that because I didn't. I struggled with that for quite a really,
Yeah,
really long time. It was like
most
this.
people do.
Yeah, I had that. I had to keep that part of my life separate from like my my world life or school and stuff. And you still do your Sunday them. You do your practices, you do all this stuff, and then you go to school and be like, yeah, yeah, whatever. And I wasn't funny like you in that sense. I mean, I got crudely funny later in life, but like in like high school, so I wasn't a funny kid or even junior high. I was more of like a regular dude, and then I played sports, and then I got really jockey. But then
Yeah.
but there's it's a weird childhood in some sense. I feel like a lot of the diaspora, and particularly Hindu diaspora, have to struggle a bit more than I think other diasporas do because our traditions, our cultures are so alien to everybody. It's just so other, right? Like it's like the simple fact, like if you're Muslim, like you don't have anything really uniquely different that you would do. Like, but for Hindus there is, right? There is if you worship Hanuman or Ganesha, or you have these gods that kind of look like, oh, you're kind of like in their worldview, I would say you guys are kind of like mid or low, and we're
It's
like,
like demonic to them,
yeah,
right?
yeah. I mean, so some people it's demonic. Some people it's just like, well, how dumb are you? You guys are worshiping monkeys,
I
and you're
know.
just like, and you're like, well, I guess that's bad. I don't think it is, but like when you're at that age, you're like, oh, you try to justify that in your head. Nowadays, I'm like, well, it's not. It's no different than worshiping a stone in middle of the Kaaba or worshiping at the altar and you see a cross. I mean, these are symbols, right? Hanuman does exist, but he
Yeah.
exists in a way that you don't understand. And you
Right.
can't understand until you're in that world.
You're right. I agree. And I mean, there's something about the legibility of Dharma, of
Right.
Dharmic, which is, it does not exist in the same way. A Muslim kid growing up, I'm not saying they had it easier, especially in the post 9/11 era of
That
things.
difference. Yeah.
But it's like their shit is still very legible, right? Because it's all coming from the same kind of religious cultural context in many
Right.
ways, right? Of these Abrahamic, it's all the blood of Abraham, right? That's
Right.
flowing all of these faiths. And so it's much far more legible. uh, between Christians, Jews, and Muslims, right? There's a bit of a lingua franca there, which Hinduism, it is extremely illegible to these people,
Yeah,
right? And I've talked about this on Shakti Punch, but it is also an aesthetically maximalist religion, right? And that we're not desert people, right? It's not just a sere, empty landscape of a thing, right? It's like our shit is like it's drawing on the place from which it comes, right? So you are
right.
going to see monkeys, tigers, lions, bears. Oh my, like it's all there, right? And that legibility is I think the big thing that actually has alienated a lot of Hindus from their own religion in the diaspora, right?
Yeah,
Because illegibility is not just on the level of like, oh, I'm getting bullied a little bit in school, although that's where it starts and that is the seed of it, right?
sure.
That illegibility eventually translates to a lot of people to, well, this is actually could get in the way of economic opportunities, right? Or my ability
Yeah,
to actually get ahead in a society, you know what I mean? And so if they're not just simply hiding it and like you did, compartmentalizing it, you know, atheist in the streets, Hindu in the sheets vibes, right?
yeah,
And it's them completely just being, well, I'm just an atheist or I'm just an agnostic and I just, you know, I go about my business. I'm an American and that's what I
right.
do, right? Um, and so I think that's a big reason behind it. And I think that that lack of legibility of Hinduism in America and to the broader American psyche is what has alienated a lot of diaspora Indians from getting in touch with it and actually reaping the benefits of Dharma.
Absolutely. I mean, like, since we're seeing at the stage of like when we're younger, I feel like the struggle I have is I think our parents' generation didn't know how to take that lingua franca of Hinduism and take it into the world that we grew up in or lived in or society, right? And it's not to say it's a disservice they did, because I don't think it's that. I just think they didn't have the tools and
Yeah.
they didn't understand identity the way we do. Like
Yeah.
in India, identity is not like that, right? You just go out, you do your thing, and no one's really concerned about it. I mean, on the caste thing, that's a whole other point, but that's secondary to like
Yeah.
regular functioning of society. Here, it's like who you are really is on your sleeve, and
Yes.
if and I think that's where they didn't understand that about us growing up. Because I mean, I'm 45. I think you're probably in your late 30s or something, right? So it's similar background. It's like then we have to navigate that, and we don't have the tools ourselves when we're kids. So there is that rejection. Oh, it's too much work. It's too much work for me to try to reconcile this. So it's much easier to be American than it is to have this Hindu-ness and think about the Hindu-ness. So let's let the Hindu-ness go aside.
Yeah.
And you're right, and because like even in like when you think about like the nature of what we consider, solemn or spiritual things, we have Diwali on one hand and Gadba and Ras and these huge festivals and colors and lights and people are dancing and singing. But then you go to church and it's like very somber and very like
Yes.
this, except for like some, there's gospel churches and things like that have
Yeah.
a little
Yeah.
more
Yeah.
flavor to them. But even the mosque is very somber. So
Yes.
the nature of spirituality is a little different in these
Definitely.
traditions, and,
Definitely.
and that makes it tough for we like, oh, that's just cultural. What we do right now, Garba, is just cultural. It's not really
Yeah.
religious. Like, but you're like, well, actually, it is kind of really religious. It is. It's a play of Krishna and Radha, these leelas that they're doing. It's very important to the core of understanding what the idea of the Paramatma and Jiva meshing together and enjoying time
Mm.
together in a way that's like expressive. So yeah,
Yes. I totally agree. And the drawback of it, right, is that like you said, okay, well, we're kind of there's a individuation of these things, right? Or there's a separation of them. Like this is just culture now. This is not the religion, right? But
yeah,
it is. And comparing it to, well, the somberness of the relative somberness of
right, right.
Abrahamic faiths, right? Where it's like, oh, I have to go to church and this is this guy. But what's happening there and that we really missed out on is the ability to learn about what is actually underpinning everything, right? Because we just do the rituals and everything is just kind of colorful and it's very noisy and it has power to it, right? So let's
Yeah,
never forget that. The ritual and things like that are still hugely important. But we didn't go to temple to learn per se, right?
no, no,
Went to temple really to worship, you know.
right.
very
Or
strictly
communal gathering, one of the two,
communal
right?
gathering. Yes, precisely. But when you're going to church and you're going in mosques, Friday mosque services, right? You're getting lectures. You're learning about things. You're learning about what Allah wants you to do, right? So you're learning about the sacrifice of Jesus or whatever,
Right, right.
a Catholic service or things like that. Or even in a Protestant service, they're teaching you, right?
Yeah,
It's very much about teaching you. And even at the temple that I grew up in, they would try to give us like Sunday school, right? Something
right.
that's manageable to everybody. There'd be a Sunday school, but it wasn't even teaching us about the religion. It was just like, oh, you're going to learn Hindi here. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
You're going to learn or whatever language, right? You're going to learn Hindi here, and that's going to be what we're doing here, right? Um, and that to me that's been the big gap I feel like in the diaspora Hindu community is like actually no, because the teachings themselves are so powerful,
mm,
right? They're so powerful. And these are teachings that are, they're not just timeless. They're not just part of our tradition. These are things that are very future looking as well,
right.
right? Um, and so that was a huge gap for us. And I feel like it was a missed opportunity, but the game it's a long game always, right?
Right, right, right.
We're part of one early phase of the diaspora right now, right? I think things are turning and they're going to continue to turn and develop. And I mean, whether you like him or not, Vivek Ramaswamy, right?
Yeah, yeah.
One thing that I really liked about Vivek and when he was talking about his religion is that he would talk about his religion, but then he would actually start in many other topics of discussion. He would start basically talking about Dharma, but he just wouldn't call it Dharma.
Dharma, yeah.
He would talk about, well, what is your essence as a person and what are you supposed to do in your life?
Right, right.
Like, how are you fitting into the whole kind of fabric of reality? And I was like, this is impressive. And to me, that's a guy who I think is actually pretty well steeped in Dharma, but is just like he understands the legibility issue. And so he finds other ways of communicating it, right?
Yeah, yeah.
He can't speak in Tamil and he can't speak in Sanskrit to people, Sanskrit terms, but he's talking to people in English about essentially what are Hindu dharmic concepts. And I think that's going to be a form of that. My Hindi is very broken at this point, and I'm not here to actually speak in Hindi to
Right,
people. I'm doing Shakti Punch, right? I'm actually here to
right.
be a student and to speak in the language in my own vernacular and bring people in who share that vernacular. You know what I mean? It's
Right.
really for diaspora people or people from the West, really, because that's where I feel like the work needs to be done and communicating what is this ism about.
Right, right. I feel like it would have been funny if he starts talking about Dharma on the campaign trail and some guy from the south like, "What you talking about Dharma here for?" Like
Dharma.
No, Dharma. Is that like a cream corn? It just, but you're right. I mean, I think he in his campaign trail and he does really take some of these Hindu ideas and kind of I wouldn't say he essentializes them because that seems really weird, but he more translates them to language that makes sense in the American context. And I think that's a fair question, right? Like, because that is the cultural issue of this day and age is what is the thing we should be doing as a people? What is what is our duty relationship with our governments, with our society, right? Because as one of the issues that arises with any sort of like the more freedom you get, the less I guess identity you can have. Because then you just become you pick and choose. You don't know where your relationships sit, right? Like I think that is fundamentally what's wrong. What's the core of the problem we're having today is there's so much freedom, but there's no direction for that freedom. And it's just like and I think that is really scary for a lot of people. And that's what was causing this tension. That's how I think about this. And I think his questioning around this about what is your essence is kind of what we should be doing is saying what not only is it about me, it's about like where do I sit with everyone else? And do I have duties to people? And do I have relationships? Or is it just about my inherent happiness? Do what's best for you, bro. That you're like, you know?
I mean, it's so funny because we don't think about Hinduism as much in terms of its social applications the way we do with the three Abrahamic religions, which are
Right.
actually socially driven. Everything is about your relationship to other people, right?
Yeah.
Grouping, outgrouping, society, all that. But Hinduism is equally that. The approach is just different in that you do start with the individual in terms of understanding, well, what is your place in society, right? What is your place
Right.
according to there's this concept that Dharma itself rests on of Rita, right?
Right.
It's just like the natural order of things, you know what I mean?
Right.
And you uphold that, right? And then where do you fit into that? And so, in the sense, it is very much a social religion, but growing up in America, we're all very atomized as people. I'm just an individual unit, and we're all
Mhm.
rogue. It's a very entropic, chaotic thing that's
Right.
happening.
Right.
And it's purely governed by economics, right? And capitalism and things like that. And to me, Dharma is an amazing way of centering yourself within all of that kind of chaos,
Yeah.
because this is the Wild West. It truly is the Wild West, right? Religion itself holds no sway here, in a sense, right? I mean,
No.
it's a battleground issue, right? In terms of things like abortion and stuff like that. It's not to say it doesn't exist, but that's we're not placed in a society that is governed by spiritual concepts or spiritual
No.
principles, you know. Um, but Dharma to me is more useful than something like an Abrahamic tradition, which is like, well, this is the actual law, and these are the laws you're going to really follow, right?
Right.
And operating as the shadow government of the other government that's actually there. You know what I mean? Like, um, to me, it's a much more interesting and healthy way of approaching social responsibility, um, is by
Yeah.
seeing in yourself and then understanding yourself then in relation to a greater whole.
Right. And the thing with Dharma in the social context is it really is about ties that bind and how, like the very root of Dharma is that which maintains and upholds. So how is it that you maintain your society, right? Like, and how is it that you maintain your family units? How do you maintain yourself at the first stage, right? Like, how do you maintain yourself? What do? You need food, water, shelter. You need not only that, but you need like inner development. Because if
Yeah.
you're just not, if you're stagnating internally as a person, as a self, then it's everything else is just going to be a consequence of that. It's going to be the inner feelings going to lead to outer feeling in some sense, right? Like if inner senses are not balanced, like if you're overly focused on wealth or overly focused on like sex or pleasure, or you're overly focused on these things, then that plays out in the rest of how you're engaged in society. So
Definitely.
I think Dharma is just saying, start here, build that, and then build this from around there, right? Like this is, there's this great line.
It's
So
self.
Vidura, yeah, yeah. So this is a beautiful thing. People can interpret this in interesting. This in the Vidurniti, Vidura says, in order to save a family, give up an individual. In order to save a town, give up a family. In order to save a city, give up a town. In order to save the country, give up a city. In order to save the universe, give up the self. Right.
Yes.
This idea is ultimately like, if you're looking to save everything around, you have to give up these connections to the world that you think are real but aren't, right? Fundamentally. So in that sense, Dharma is about, you start with the smallest to protect the larger, and then when you get to the largest, you save the smallest. Like,
Yes.
and this is the interesting part to me is just when we talk about Dharma, we talk about it as a religion, and I feel like we have to separate the religious aspect, meaning like it's not a religion. Hindu Dharma, Jain Dharma, those aren't dharmas. They're
Yeah.
just they're religions. Dharma is something universal, right? It's like
Yeah.
where you have ahimsa, you have anirsham shaya, you have the yamas and yoga. Those are all dharmic things that are not there because there's a god. They're just there. It's a
These are
nature of
rules of
existence.
reality, right? These are
Yeah,
the rules that govern reality, actually,
yeah,
right? In a sense, it is more scientific or philosophical, right? But there's no, one of the tragedies of the West to me is the separation of philosophy from the liberation of the soul, right?
right. Yeah,
Uh, and that's how Western philosophy has gone. And that to me, Western philosophy in many ways to me is, it's really just anxiety. It's just anxiety around language is where it kind of ends up. You know what I
yeah.
mean?
It
And I feel
is.
like with Eastern and with Dharmic philosophy in general, what is special about it is that it never loses sight of what the goal is, which is the
No.
liberation of self, right? And everything, all these different philosophies that we're reading, whether it's you're reading stuff from the Yoga Vashishta or the Upanishads or whatever it is, these are all different ways of understanding liberation. Everything ladders up to
Right.
moksha. You know what I mean? And to me, that's very special. And I think that's why you see a lot of people from the West, right, who are very very this thing, they're disillusioned by their religions, they're disillusioned by their institutions of governance, and
Right.
they're disillusioned by institutions of capitalism, right? Because none of these things can fulfill them because they're not starting from the place of understanding the nature of self, right?
Right, right. So I mean, the nature it's interesting because you are. I mean, you're right. There's so much, but I also think there's such a heavy emphasis on moksha and liberation that, especially when people talk, the gurus and people they talk about that, and I'm like, that's important for a very minor part of us, like a tiny, tiny group of people that want that. Like most people don't want that. They want artha, kama, dharma, or artha, kama, right? And dharma is a regulatory principle that manages all these things. So the
Yes.
question then is like, how? Why aren't we talking about dharma? Is always my concern. Is why aren't we talking about like how dharma functions? Like, and this is what the Mahabharata's key point of the text is like, dharma exists as absolutes for sure. There's a dharma, there's dharma, but to know what that is very, very difficult. And to
Very
know
different.
what the right thing to do is very difficult.
Yeah.
And so the Mahabharata is there as a guide to help us understand how we can think about them and how
Mm.
we can let it influence our lives. Mahabharata, I mean, Ramayana tells you how Dharma functions with a perfect person, with the
Yeah.
Ramachandra, right? Where Mahabharata is telling you, hey, we're not that guy, we're not Rama, we're something else. And
Dealing with
because
very
of that,
imperfect people, you
yeah.
know,
And
they're
then
half
so you
gods.
yeah, yeah, and so we struggle with that, and Mahabharata guides us towards that. And my biggest thing is one of my things is like part of the podcast is I want people to know dharma, like like values of dharma, like why is ahimsa important? Why and how does that play out in our life? Does it mean you have to be vegetarian? Does it mean you have to like not commit violence? Does it mean any of these things? Like let's talk about that. Let's or why is like giving or thinking about other beings like one of the qualities Krishna talked about in the Gita 16 is you know um daya sarva bhuteshu, right? For compassion for all beings. Why is that important?
Yeah.
Like why do other traditions say treat your other fellow man as like your neighbor, but our tradition says no, not fellow man, sarva bhuta, all beings
Yes.
treat with compassion. Why?
Yeah.
And those are the questions I think are important.
I mean, to me, it's great because those concepts are very connected to the deeper philosophical underpinnings,
Mhm.
right? Because you're
Right,
treating all things as you treat the self, right? And
right,
when you regard all as the self, which is now we're getting really steeped into the Advaita stuff, right? When you treat all things as the self, a natural compassion arises of that, right? And to me, I think, to your point about like, well, why aren't we teaching about Dharma? To me, the Bhagavad Gita that's the manual right there. You know what I mean?
sure,
Because it describes in pretty great detail what are the rules behind reality, but then what are the rules of yourself and how you conduct yourself within this reality, right? As a karma yogi, right? As a jnani, as a yogi, right? And laying out what are the different paths of how one can conduct themselves as an individual to it, because yes, there is the ultimate goal of moksha and the ultimate liberation, right?
right,
But the fact is that when you start comporting yourself according to these rules, right, and conducting yourselves according to these specific types, right, of a karma yogi or whatever, these are things that have immediate impacts on how you conduct your day-to-day life and your day-to-day business, right?
sure,
Whether you're a comedian or you're a guy who works in finance or you're an attorney or you're a garbage man or whatever it is, it really helps you conduct your day-to-day very practical life, in a way that
right.
is far more satisfying, right? Than to think about it as just these are just purely material things, or on the other hand, of like, oh, this is all going to lead to some ultimate liberation, right?
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know what I mean? From the very abstract to the very grimy, gritty context of it.
right.
And to me, it shepherds you along the way. It starts small, and you start small, and you don't have to. That's the thing. This is why to me bhakti is so important. You know what I mean? Like you don't need to be somebody who just meditates for 6 hours a day, right? That's amazing if you can do that, if you have the time and the discipline and the ability to do that. But it's because bhakti is really all also just about ego dissolution. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? In terms of worship. And the experience that you get from that is also equally ecstatic to that of the person who can sit there and meditate for prolonged periods of time. Somebody who can form an anthill around themselves, standing on one leg or whatever, Um, So I mean, to me, that's the value of it, and to me, it's so important that diaspora Indians understand this. You know what I mean? I mean, people from
Right.
your generation, my generation, right, who grew up feeling very disjunctive with their surroundings and things like that. It's like, no, not only is this not something that you need to hide, but this is the thing that's going to actively help propel you through this in a way that's very healthy and satisfying to you, right? And
Right.
find satisfaction.
So, I mean, as an artist, you know what's interesting? Like, I would say is what I find a lot with the diasporic artists, whether it's going to be dance, music, movies, TV shows, whatever. When it comes to issues of themselves or Hindu, there's always this guilt that I always find around it. Like there's always like the caste element they have to bring in somehow, and there's always this sense of like now it's like patriarchy and this that plays out here, right? So like I have a lot of family friends that are dancers, musicians, but they're like traditionally trained dancers, just traditionally trained musicians. But now when they do their pieces, it's always like somehow connected to this. And I'm always like, did you and I live in different realities? I mean, I didn't understand like I knew my that I was a Brahmana from a young age, but I didn't know anyone else's Varna. I didn't care. I was never
Yeah.
taught that. Like it was never like my dad. Like I married a person that belonged to I don't know, OBC community or whatever. What do you want to call it? Like my first marriage was no one in my family cared. Like I didn't even know that what that caste was. I didn't care. But what I find is a lot of times this conversation occurs, and it's such a weird thing that I think the foot forward they want to place around Indians and Hindus and stuff is always this. It's like this negative position and how they're rebelling against it. And it's such a weird thing. But what are your thoughts?
I mean, I think to me, especially when you get into other classical arts in terms of
Yeah,
dance, uh, plastic arts, painting, these things are very heavily connected to academia as well.
yeah,
Right? And as such, they're very connected to concepts of social justice. You know what I mean? And as such, they're actually in ways that they don't realize really connected to Christianity. You know what I mean? In terms of what the spiritual grammar is that they're all kind of adhering to.
hmm,
And so for me, dancers and stuff like that, it's like also in traditional arts, this is all tied to grants. You know what I mean? This is all tied to grants. And so if you're going to be a Bharatanatyam dancer, you can't just be a Bharatanatyam dancer and say, hey, here's an amazing, hey, here's a new choreographical take that I have on the Ramayana or something, right? It can't just be that. It has to be like, oh no, this is um this is actually coming through a lens of criticality, right?
yeah.
And to me, a lot of that is really around grants. It's like grant money, you know what I mean?
Okay,
There's a whole ecosystem which is very much tied to academia. Um, and that determines what the output is actually going to be and the kinds of things that you're going to see and that are being patronized by these
right.
organizations, institutions, right? And to me, I guess to me, that's what I see is the kind of connecting thread because I know a lot of artists, right? I know a lot of artists and visual artists, dancers,
Yeah,
filmmakers, things like that, right? And it's like you can't do something that's going to be affirmative of the dominant culture, right? That is
right,
going to be the biggest sin right away. Like everything has to be shitting on your culture, right? Otherwise, it has no critical value, and thus it has no philosophical value, right? And
right.
thus it has no cultural value. Um, and look, there's not criticality is important, right? Art is a
Of course it
dialectic
is. Yeah.
process itself, and it has to be. But the fact is that it's very what that criticality is extremely narrow in its focus now, especially in the West, especially in
Mhm.
America. Um, and to me, that's what I see at work here is the connections to Western academia and Western knowledge production. Most importantly, this is all
Right,
about
right,
Western production, right? And so, if what you're doing as a Hindu who's doing something in dance or in cinema or whatever, it always has to have that level of critiquing that. You know what I
sure.
mean? In service of something that is completely deracinated from anything and which is supposed to be in a realm of just pure critique. You know what I mean? That's the way I see these things, at least. I mean,
Are you
as a
seeing that also in like the non-classical arts? Are you seeing that in your like circle of because you're pretty involved in like media or or television or film, you know people in that area, right? So like, how do you see the diaspora or Hindus in America? How do they think about their own traditions and viewpoints?
Well, it's like, look, Hindus don't have, this is going to be a spicy take. Hindus, never committed a 9/11, which put us on a cultural back foot in this country, right?
Right,
From which we can then emerge from that muck. And this is what we're doing. This is the affirmative expression of who we are as Hindus, right?
right.
Muslims have that, right? After 9/11, Muslims were put on their back foot culturally. They went from being like, oh, this is just some weird thing, but they're kind of generally more or less accepted in society, to being like,
Yeah,
public enemy number one. And on every institutional level, they are going to be suppressed, they're going to be surveilled, they're going to be this, and they're experiencing a level of alienation which is very fruitful in terms of media production, right?
right.
So the expression of Islam in an affirmative way, and not a critical way, is going to become very powerful and potent, right? Within the broader
Mm-hmm.
context of American culture. Hindus don't have that, right? Hindus can't really speak to a broad institutional oppression in this country, right? So, what are Hindus in this country left to do in an ecosystem which values the tearing down of institutions? Well, they're going to have to point the knives at themselves, right? They're going to have to
Right.
cannibalize. So, I mean, Hindus are never going to probably do a 9/11 style thing where we're going to have to be surveilled on a massive level, right? So what do? Well, we start looking at India itself and start taking on the sins of India as a country as our own sins here, right?
Right.
A lot of people had no concept of caste, and I'm not a Brahmin either, right? I'm a Kayast, right? And Kayasts are people who, depending on where you were and when you were throughout Indian history, have been at the top, and they've also been considered Shudras at various points, right?
Right.
It's a very amorphous thing, right? I think caste is a relatively new caste designation at that,
And that depends on where you are, what that term means, and what time. Yeah, it's complex, but yeah, yes.
Really
Continue. Yeah,
complex, but I had zero concept of caste, like
yeah,
none. And even if I had asked, because I learned about caste in my American high school,
yeah.
what I mean? And then I had to go back and like, what caste are we? And my parents were like, like we don't follow with the caste thing. That's not our thing. And now on a religious level, will they invite Brahmins over for a special puja or something like that?
Yeah.
Yeah. And the way that they interacted in their circles and their friends are Muslims and they're Baniyas and they're this and they're that, right? Like there was no dimension of caste at all, right?
Right.
But the more visible Indians have become in general, the more people are going to start looking at what's happening in India and try to
Right.
map that onto Indians here, right? And thus the Indians that are here who are having to now navigate that map that has been imposed upon them, they're now having to explore and critique and tear down, right? And for them, it's you're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. You know what I mean?
Right.
There is nothing redeeming about Dharma. There's nothing redeeming about that. No, Dharma is going to be immediately directly connected to caste, and thus we tear the whole thing down, right? Everything is
Right.
about a radical Marxist framework around just completely obliterating these institutions that have taken thousands upon thousands and thousands of years to develop, right?
Right.
Never mind the fact that Indian culture, Indic philosophy, Hindu culture is something that is continuously evolving, right? It is
Right.
continuously evolving, and that is the big difference between us and, frankly, them. You know what I
Well, I
mean?
mean, in some sense, yeah. I mean, they've evolved a lot too. I mean, but certain strands of Islam and Christianity have taken predominance. But there's been a lot of growth and evolution
Sure.
within traditions. But I mean, so on your point here, I think is well taken because like when we talk about for even Ramadan movie, right? Like let's say Ramadan movie, like people that are indigenous lovers of people of indigenous culture should be like, oh man, that's awesome. Because that's what happened in America, right? When you tear down statues of Christopher Columbus and Robert E. Lee and all the Confederate, everyone's like, yeah, that's right, good. Like we don't want the vestiges of our colonialism or slavery in America today, right? And which there's good and bad around this, right? The same thing when it happens in India is suddenly like, well, you guys are Islamophobes, and it's and we have to take that burden. I mean, not we have to take the burden, but like when I'm like, yeah, I support that temple. For me, that temple is very important. And then
Yeah.
someone's like, oh yeah, you're Hindutva. I'm like, well, I mean, no, I think there's historical injustice there. Let's fix it. And
Yeah.
and that's the conversation to have here. Even you say that today, and with a lot of like, let's say American Hindus are liberal leaning, which even though I am too, but like it's this point they'll be like, oh, you're a fascist. And you're like, come on,
I know. I know. It's like fuck off, seriously. Because look, the reason why is because and I don't want to talk about Islam here, and we're not shitting on Islam at all, but it's like,
No,
you know, sorry guys, like we didn't do a bunch of mass surveillance on Muslims, right? As Hindus, right? We didn't
yeah,
do a bunch of mass surveillance of Muslims and do all these kind of and invade a bunch of Muslim countries, right? And set up military bases all around the world, right? This is not
right,
we're mapping the war on terror, American war on terror framework of how we're supposed to um, interact with Islam as a concept and as a polity to
right,
India, which has a completely different framework for things, right?
right,
And so for them, it's like, no, this is Islamophobia. This is Islamophobia. It's like, bitch, that's an American thing. That is a
right,
Western
right,
thing,
right.
right? If you're trying to map that Western shit onto us, that's not our thing. Okay. It's like if you want to go, and the thing is, when you try to get in and you try to historicize the conversations, ah, la, 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 la,
Yeah.
la, 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 it's like that's and I wasn't trying to speak Arabic there. It's just like that's like what they do. You know what I mean?
Right,
They
right,
don't get into it at all. Right? The idea of being historical and trying to historicize things the way they're trying to do here in America, if you
right,
try to do that there, immediately they go into a sort of childish, narcissistic mode of behaving,
right, right.
They can't look at the mirror at all, right?
Well, they just don't know it, and that's the other thing. It's like people have opinions here without having a single idea of what it's like there or anywhere else, right? Like you don't know the history. If you don't know the history, you don't know the even now on the ground, people are like, yeah, like I lived in India for 2 years in just like 6 years ago, um, and people here who go there and visit, it's very similar to Ta-Nehisi Coates going to Israel for 10 days and writing a book on all like Israel Palestine. I'm like, yeah, I mean, seriously, maybe you don't do that. Maybe it's the same thing Elizabeth Wilkerson did, writing about caste, right? Going to India for like a month, coming back and saying, "Oh, I now know about what caste is." Shut up! You don't know what the fuck you're talking about, right? Like
You don't know.
honestly, like
This is the point though, right? Is that what we're dealing with here isn't even about intellectualism or
no,
philosophy or politics. It's actually about economics, right? And
yeah,
it's actually about these are marketing gimmicks, right? An Isabel Wilkerson book called Caste, right? That is a marketing gimmick, right? That's
right,
here to really uh, uh, it's feeding into basically what is essentially what began as a cottage industry, and now since then with ESG and DEI and all that stuff has now exploded into a full-fledged economy, right, around social justice, right? So the more that they can take, it's just a new flavor of a thing to write a book
yeah,
called Cat. You know what I mean? And so to me, that's marketing. That's a marketing gimmick that's happening. You know what I mean? Now, is it doing a lot of harm? Yeah, but they don't give a fuck.
right,
What they're concerned about their book tours, you know what I mean,
mm-hmm.
and how many copies they're going to sell and how spicy this can be, and they don't care about the actual history of a thing, right? It's an
No,
intellectually bankrupt exercise, pure marketing. That's the way I perceive that.
yeah, I think that's fair. I think that's fair. But like you said, there's consequences to that, right? You have around the time her book came out, you also had the big blow up with equality labs and the issues around California's trying to pass a caste discrimination law and a lot of things I thought were it just I mean in some sense it did at least mobilize Hindus to get together and do stuff. Where
Yeah.
with the flip side is like, why are we paying for whatever sins happened in India? Like, isn't that part of the reason we came here? Like, I mean, the data seems pretty clear here in America. Like, Indians or Hindus are marrying outside of their own communities at pretty like huge levels. They're marrying, other castes. They don't talk about this. They don't care about this. Like I'm married to a white woman. I have black children. I like these are things like. Do you think I think my caste? Do you think the caste is anywhere in my purview of the world? But this is where I feel like then you don't understand Indians here in America and
Yeah.
Hindus here in America. You're like you said, you're juxtapositioning whatever you think Indian Hindus are and putting it on American Hindus, and that's not fair to us at all.
Not fair, but you know what? It is natural, though, at the same time.
Sure,
The legibility issue, right? And
right,
now we're trying to make sense of who are Indians, right? Because wow, holy shit, out of nowhere, Indian CEOs are everywhere. Indians are the highest performing economic group in this
right,
country. India as a country is itself now asserting itself with a more sovereign foreign policy, right? So it's like, well, how do we make these people legible, right? There's a very cynical part of this where it's like, no, this is the way that we kind of destabilize India, right? As a
Right.
country. But then when it's talking about us here, it's like, well, how do we make sense of this, right? Because then it has to do with their own how they're perceiving themselves and their own kind of performance and how they're making their way
Right.
through society as well. And it's like, oh, well, this is caste. The thing that really is infuriating to me is whenever I hear about people discussing Indian success in America
Yes.
and these idiots, who haven't read a single book between 10 million of them are like, oh, well, this is because it's all high caste people who are coming over
Yeah.
here. It's all high caste people. It's, it's a eugenics experiment and they're sending their highest caste people over here. It's like, shut the fuck up, dude. Okay. Because the guys who are running a fucking bodega, right, in the
Yeah.
middle of Edison, New Jersey or whatever, whose kids are then going on to become software developers or
Right.
startup founders or whatever. Like, sorry,
Right.
these aren't high caste people. These are just people who were escaping what was a failed socialist experiment of India, and who are like, we need to make the most of this freedom shit. You know what I
Right.
mean? So we're gonna work our asses off. If that means that we're gonna work in a bodega and then multiply that into 10 bodegas, so be it, right? It,
But a lot of people don't also understand this part is like it's actually the what's it called, reverse casteism that ended up being a reason for people leaving, right? In the
yeah,
sense of, I mean, like, let's be frank, there's a history of caste oppression in India for sure,
yeah,
and
yeah,
they try to alleviate that in the time period from, let's say, when Indian independence happened to even now they're trying to alleviate it. Part of that was the Mandela Commission that churned over and set quotas up, right? So in places like Tamil Nadu, where, like, say, my mom's side is from, and or Bangalore or Karnataka, a lot of people left India, especially the quote unquote upper caste, because they were denied opportunity, even though they were capable, right? You couldn't get jobs, you couldn't get whatever. So your family's like, just go, like, and go figure out what you're going to do. They could have come here and utterly failed, by the way,
yes.
in the 1960s. It could have utterly failed and it's been
All
nothing
the
but
odds were against them.
right. But they somehow did well. And in doing well, when they came here, like any other community does, they first build communities with each other. You know
Mhm.
what? We're gonna work together. We're gonna help each other. We're gonna do this. And then it's like, hey, let's bring other people from our family that are struggling, and that's how you build that community, right? So in some sense, sure, there's a caste network insofar as people that left India were people that were coming from certain communities that weren't given opportunities anymore in India.
Yeah.
And then you come, but there's nothing wrong with what they did in India for the Mandela Commission setting up quotas, whatever. I don't find anything wrong with it. I think you're trying to address a historical wrong. Maybe the way you could have done it could have been different, but like I get the point. And
Yeah.
so, but there's going to be like overflow, and the people overflowed came over here and came over to other parts of the world, and and you can't now be like, well, now it's because you're high caste that you no, well, we didn't have opportunities there, so
It's so funny. I always think about India in relation to America. I feel like economically and culturally, India is like 50 years behind America.
oh,
But politically,
fashion way
but,
more.
but politically, India is like 50 years ahead of America, right?
Yeah,
In the sense that like the affirmative action regimes there, right? So what a rude awakening for Indians who are trying to escape that shit who come here. And then 20 years, 30 years later, they're instituting similar kinds of things here,
right.
in terms of no, everything's becoming identity politics again. It's like it's got to be a little bit terrifying or a bit of a rude awakening. Like, well, we were just trying to escape that shit, which does not
Right.
work. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Uh, we saw the failures of that system, and now these are things that are actually happening here. Everything, a nation is now nothing. It's reduced to nothing more than just the rubble heap of micro identities. You know what I mean?
Right. Right.
And
And that's scary, isn't it? It's like part of the reason America is great is that fundamentally you're just American. Like
yeah,
at the end of the day, your identity should matter less about who you are in terms of your ethnic background, religious, whatever. It's supposed to be a place where we all actually are. We do well together. We raise ourselves up together. I know there's deeper issues on this, on like the racial points of history of African Americans and things like that, for sure. But like that
yeah,
vision and idea is like we're trying to be less
yeah,
identitarian, but
yeah.
that's not what's playing out anymore, right?
I know, I know. And I mean, that's what the whole caste thing is here. I'm like, well, why the fuck do you want to import the caste system to America? Like, are you
Right.
insane? You know, if a white guy ever asks me what my caste is, I will punch him. Okay. I will kick him in the nuts. Okay. It's like, we don't want that shit here. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? It's like, why on earth would you want to import the caste system here and try to really like manifest it into existence, right? That's what's
Right.
happening. Like with all the stuff that was happening with like whatever equality labs and these people, it's like when you look at the cases they were trying to bring up, they were really so overdetermined and so put upon, right? And that's why they got thrown out of court, right? Because in court
Right.
everything is kind of laid bare, right? When it's put through the kind of highly scrutinized justice system, you know, that's why the whole Cisco cast thing got thrown out. And when you looked into the actual facts of that case, you're like, this is demented, actually. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like when you looked at and you saw what was actually happening, the whole thing with the Baps temple, you know, with that whole thing where they're like they're importing low caste workers here, they're importing Dalits here to do this, that, or the other thing, and then you look and see what happened where they were literally paying these guys. They were the ones who were actually doing this, of like bribing these people to say that they were oppressed, and then you don't get any of the media about that. You don't get the how any of these things resolved, right?
No.
And it's been such a PR driven society in America where it's like, hey, no, the PR is out. There's caste discrimination at Cisco. Boom, that's the story. Then it's not that no, there's no caste discrimination there because it's like
Right.
negation of a thing is not as big of a story as the construction of that thing, right? Same
Sure.
with App's case. It's like it didn't make any headlines when it was discovered that actually no, the litigants were really in the wrong and they were the actual perpetrators of an injustice here, right? You're not seeing anything about that. It's just like no. And so these are the things that are going to stay in the mind of Americans, right? And
Right.
that's by design, and that's also just by the natural order of how media functions in America. Um, and it's a shame, but that's also why podcasts like the stuff that we're doing, whether it's Mango Bae or Meru Media or Shakti Punch or whatever Brown
Right.
Pundit, right? That's why this is important. Is people who are actually in there and in the know, who are know about these things or are actively learning about these things in a more um, like rigorous fashion are very
Right.
important, right? And it's
Right.
important for our own communities more than anything. So people in our own communities can go out and actually have the spine, right, to then actually say, actually, no, that's not what's happening here, and here is what's actually happening. It's super important, you know, and we have to look at the Muslim diaspora as well because they were the ones they were doing this for their own communities. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Whatever beefs happened between the Hindu American Foundation and CARE and the Council of American, the fact is that we have to look at them as a model. You know what I mean? Of like they're the ones who are writing their own story. We're the ones who have to be writing our own story. We can't let other people write our stories for us.
But Hindus tend to be much more reactionary to that because of the diversity of different viewpoints we have. It's much more difficult to figure out what it is that we're trying to push forward. Like, and I think that is always going to be the strength and the weakness of being Hindu, right? Like, if we're not going to align our like Muslims can be like, yeah, we support the Quran, the Allah, this kind of tradition. Like, what are we as Hindu going to say? Like, are we going to say we're Vaishnavite, Advaitin, Shaivite, Shaktad? That's the difficulty. And then so we have to create a sense of community at a larger level that might be, in some sense, not naturally created. I don't know if you get what I'm saying.
I mean, but that's why we're at a very interesting kind of challenge point as Hindus, right? Because now we're having to define ourselves because we're in an ecosystem now where everything is about identity politics, right?
Right.
Now we're at this point where we're having to define ourselves and crystallize the idea of what it means to be a Hindu definitively, which is like, okay, well, that's going to have benefits for us here, right? In terms of telling our story and stuff like
Right.
that. But it's also very, it's a kind of countervailing or
Yeah.
a force to what it actually means to be Hindu. You know what I mean? Which
Right.
is a decentralized thing, which is very much rhizomatic. You know what I mean? In terms of how we are proliferating Dharma and how we're exploring Dharma and things like that. You know. And it has a stifling potentiality to it. I'm not saying it is stifling, but that is a potential that is inherent in what it means for us to crystallize our identity here.
But I think that's a fair question, because I do think it's stifling at some level. I understand, because, like, there was a movement a couple of years ago about defining what a Hindu is, and that was kind of like saying things like, you don't eat beef, you don't do this, you don't do that. I'm like, but that has nothing to do with Hindu, by the way. Like, I'm like, if you eat beef and you still are, you can still be Hindu. That's not an issue to me. It's like, yeah, you have. I think people don't get the fact that, because we have this idea of karma is such a really, it's not talked about enough. And I think the concept, if you actually believe in this karma dharma interaction, then in essence all people become quote unquote Hindus, because
Yes.
it doesn't matter if you eat beef or you believe this or you do that, because the idea is this universal framework applies to you regardless.
Yeah, I
So
mean, that's the whole challenge of being Hindu, though, right? Is like
right,
in no Hindu scriptures from however many thousands of years ago to this day will you ever read something where it's like a Hindu is this,
no,
right?
no,
All of our scriptures are about this is what it means to be human. You know what I
right,
mean? This is the human project. These are the laws that govern the reality, no matter who you are. If you're a deer or you're a human being or whatever it is, right? It's about humans mostly, right? But and that's the big thing, right? That's the big difference. If you're a Jew, it's like everything in your books is about like this is what it means to be a Jew. These are our people. If you're a
right,
Christian, the elect, right? You believe in this same thing. The Muslim, you're the Ummah, right? So they're already out the gate politically motivated, right? They're politically structured, right? For us,
mhm.
it's oh no, this is a philosophical system. For me, being a Hindu is never about who you worship or what you worship. It's about how you worship, right?
Yeah, it's a praxis.
Yes, it's about a praxis, you know what I mean? So, I mean, case in point, like my mom has like a little Virgin Mary in her puja. She's got a little baby Jesus in her puja, you know what I mean?
He's
Um,
Christian, crypto Christian.
oh, crypto Christian. Oh my, rice bag, rice bag. Like, no, it's like it's sitting there right next to a picture of Sai Baba, next to a picture of Hanuman, and
Right,
with a shivling in the middle. You know what I mean? It's like it's never really about that. But what our challenge is well, what are our shibboleths, right? What are
yeah,
those identifying markers of who we are that can help people say yes, they are definitively a Hindu? The beef thing, that is a prevailing shibboleth, you know what I mean? And so it's
right,
very easy for Hindus to want to be like, well, this is who we are. And if you eat beef, you're not a Hindu, right?
right.
Case in point blank. And there's a compelling case to be made for that, right? On a
Sure.
scriptural level, certainly. But all of these things, you know what I mean? Like, I mean, I don't know. What are some other prominent Hindu shibboleths? Vegetarianism, not eating beef. But
Uh,
all our other shibboleths to ourselves are more ideas. You know what I mean? It's the
right.
idea of Dharma, the idea of Dharma, right? The ideas of moksha, the ideas of this, that, the other thing. You know what I mean? Jai Shri Ram, that's become our takbir. You know what I mean?
I
You know,
hope not. I hope not the same thing.
it's like, you know what I mean? It's like now that's our thing is Jai Shri Ram. That's our Allahu Akbar in the legibility, right? In the sort of
Right.
economy of legibility in this country now, right? And it's like even a lot of Hindus are buying into. I'm a Shaivite. I'm a Shakta now. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I'm like I love Lord Ram. Of course, I believe in Sri Ram. I was raised on the Ramayan. My parents are Vaishnavas. You know what I mean? It's a very Satyanarayan focused household, but
Right.
it's our thing now. Everything is Jai Shri Ram. Again, just cultural shibboleths. You know what I
Right.
mean? Identifying markers that help to crystallize the identity of being a Hindu. And it's a very complicated phenomenon. And it's like we can try to move the needle as much as we want individually, but how this is all going to take shape is who fucking knows, you know what I mean?
Right. And that's tough in America too. Like, what is a Hindu here, right? Like, it's not even in India. They deal with this. Is being a charvak, atheist? Are you? Can you be Hindu then? Are you a cultural Hindu? What does that mean? Do you just follow the cultural issues? What is dharma without the concept of God, or without the concept of like these traditions? I don't know. And these are like the things we're trying to understand and figure out. And it's difficult. I think interesting time period. And one of the things I think is sad is um, I don't think, and I'll probably get a lot of flack for this. I don't think the traditional systems of matas and scholars in India are doing the work they need to be doing on this. They're just not engaging the way people like. I think Staneshwarji is doing Staneshwar is doing a great job. There's a few other people like that, but I think the traditional panditas and acharyas and gurus in India aren't doing that. They're not engaging in a global level to define what we are, how do our ideas move forward? How do we engage with Western ideas? How do we engage with other traditions? Because we can't just sit here in our mata and be like, this is the truth. No, we have to engage with ideas. We've done that historically. We stopped. I don't know why.
No, we stopped. I think you're right, and this is the kind of paradox of the so-called trad, right?
Right.
The trad to me is extremely important, right? Because we
Yeah.
never want to lose sight of what our roots are, and these people are immense repositories of knowledge that is very valuable, right? But at the same time, is like we have to be about Dharmic futurism, right?
Right.
What is the future of this? And that requires that kind of engagement. You know what I mean? The thing is like it's so crazy. You brought up Acharya Tamalsina, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, you listen to some of his lectures about the formation of Tantra, right? And Trikashaivism and stuff like that. And this isn't happening by just sitting in among other Shaivites, right? This is happening by talking to Buddhists, talking to Vedantins, right? Talking to X, Y, and Z, all these other people. This is how the
Right.
formation occurs, right? This is how knowledge is being created and developed, right? To create new systems, you know what I mean? It's always been, or it's always had that futurism baked into it. The Yoga Vashishta, immensely futuristic text, you know what I mean? It's a retelling of so many stories through an Advaita perspective, right?
Sure.
And it's Vashishta telling Lord Ram, hey, you're not real, bro. I'm not real. None of this is real. Think about how radical that actually is. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Think about how radical that is. And so when did that spirit of exploration, that spirit of development, when did that stop? I don't know. I'm not
Right.
the historian of these religion of this movements, right? I'm not that. I'm a very humble student. I'm a dumb guy, actually. But I'm like, well, when did that stop? When did the spirit of that stop? And I don't know. I think it's there's a certain circling of the wagons mentality that had to occur at some point, right, to preserve these things. Uh,
Sure.
and then you kind of get stuck in the mud. You know what I mean? You're like Abhimanyu trying to free the chariot wheel from the mud. You know what I mean? But you're at the risk then of falling into oblivion then and falling into irrelevance then. And I think your point about the mutts and all that, and the pundits and all that is well taken, you know what I mean? But like, well, what is the way forward? I don't know. To me, the way the Dharmic futurists are actually uh people like Vimarsha Foundation, right? Stuff like
Yeah.
that. But really, you have to look at ISKCON, you know, you have to
ISKCON.
maps, you know.
Shinran mission does it. Even
My-
even the Ramakrishna mission in some senses is pushing a lot of this stuff, which I think is very important. Um, but also the thing is they're very focused on spirituality as spirituality, not like the praxis or ideas of being Hindu, right? It's very much it's a different. The Ramakrishna mission is Hindu, but it's a little different. I
yeah.
feel.
I mean,
But I
I'm
mean,
wondering what the
yeah,
future is going to be when somebody's a Hindu. They're going to be like, "Oh, are you a BAPS guy? Are you an
yeah,
ISKCON guy?" You know.
yeah,
So maybe these sampradayas and these kind of more corporatized movements is actually the future of what it is, just based purely on the fact of of what capitalism is, right? And how that actually shapes how we have to perceive a religion. You know what I mean?
right, right.
Uh,
And that's difficulty is also is like I don't think so. I don't think the corporation structure is the way it needs to go. I just feel like our ideas are not being engaged, and we're not engaging with ideas. Structures are structures. You can have like little tiny like villages or little places around the world, and that's fine. But it's just the ideas are not being engaged at the idea level. I think is more the problem. It's like what is how are Hindus supposed to view things like I don't know, like AI, gene therapy. How do we engage with people with? How do we bring in? How do we bring in people that aren't of the Hindu fold into a traditional Hindu world? How do
so
we engage in those kind of things?
yeah, look, here's something that I talked about, and I'm not trying to plug Shakti Punch too much,
Oh
but
yeah, yeah,
yeah, on an episode of Shakti Punch, I talked about appropriation and this whole concept of Hindus getting very mad about Westerners appropriating. And
right,
I understand the emotional terrain of that, and I understand the emotional historical terrain behind that, right?
sure,
The fact of the matter is that Hindus, for all of our obsession with STEM education, right, for all of our engagement in the natural sciences as a community, have never once or rarely going into and drawing upon those systems of knowledge that they've become masters of and applying that to dharmic frameworks and understanding how to push dharma forward with that,
Right,
right?
right.
So Indians can get mad about Westerners doing pranayama and then just putting it in their own language and their own terms. But the fact
Yeah.
of the matter is that these breathwork people, yeah, they're drawing on pranayama. But if you read a lot of their books, they're like, hey, this is all drawn on stuff that comes from India and stuff like that. So it's not even as pernicious as they want to think it is.
That's
But
right.
the fact is that these people are not taking it and they're validating it through Western science. You know why? Because they have to. And this is the world that they live in. And this is also now the world that Indians and Indians in the diaspora are living in. And so we have to approach things in a similar fashion, right? Like you want Indians to keep the intellectual IP over pranayama, then you have to be the ones who are in the laboratory, who are conducting the tests, who are taking your knowledge of the natural sciences and now validating what we're doing in that
Right.
framework and then creating your own businesses around it, right?
But I
So
think part of the problem is just that is the business idea is some people's argument, and one of my arguments would be like the commercialization of certain things by its very nature defiles it. Like
I,
if you commercialize like this concept of teaching, right? The yoga, which is why also Acharya and stuff, they don't take money to teach. They teach, right? And then you give. Because the idea is this knowledge, whatever this tradition is spiritualized.
yeah,
So it shouldn't be turned into a commodity to be brokered and sold like we have created in the yoga industry with these fucking yoga pants and Lululemons, and now you built this entire this economy of bullshit.
yes.
And that I think is the bigger issue. If someone sat down the street and called it breath work and just was teaching free, like, pranayama, but they called it like deep, heavy breathing or whatever, who the fuck cares, right? Fundamentally. Like, but I think the problem is you turn it into something else and say you created it in some sense. I think that's the big problem.
Interesting. I mean, yeah, saying that you created, I agree. But here's my belief, and this is to me, it's a very hard-nosed brass tacks way of looking at it,
Right.
is we can wish for the world that we wish we were living in,
Yeah.
or we can engage in the world as it is now, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like Hindus have to engage in the world as it is now, right? And I'm not saying that we have to own IP of a thing or whatever, because people's complaints are really more about like, hey, why are Indians being erased from the picture of these things now, right?
Right.
And look, the other fact of the matter is it's not just about the corporatization or the Lululemons, right? It's also the fact that Indians themselves in India or in America, sorry, are actually not engaged with these practices as much as they should be. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, that's true.
I just don't see it. You know what I mean? And it's because we came here and we were like, well, how do we get ahead in this country? And it's by keeping our head down and working hard and doing this X, Y, and Z. It wasn't through doing pranayama as a kid, right? It
Right.
wasn't through, I only was introduced to pranayama in my 20s by
Mm-hmm.
an uncle in India who decided to give up his job as a businessman and just pursue pranayama and yoga full time. And then when he came to visit the States, he's like, hey, let me put you onto this stuff here. And this is,
Yeah, yeah.
and then it start, and that's how it kind of, I'm kind of losing the thread on what I'm saying here, but it's we were not as engaged with the roots of of our praxis, right? We're not engaged with the practical roots of what we do in terms of things like meditation, yoga, pranayama, things like
Yeah.
that. That's our own fault, and that's why it's important to create these discussions that we're creating now, right, around them to bring
Yeah.
Indians back into it, right? To bring Indians back into it. And that to me is maybe this is where it actually has to start, right? It has to start with the podcasts. It has to start with people on an intellectual, cultural level
Right.
engaging with things. You know what I mean? And getting the word out that way that it's safe to come back and engage in these
Right.
practices,
On
right?
the flip side, I will say, like, isn't it better if people just do the practice and who cares who is attributed to? Like,
That
if
is
it
my, so look,
benefits everyone.
this is another point that I made, which is
Yeah.
like, if somebody is breathing like a Hindu, if they're doing a non-sleep deep rest like a Hindu, and maybe they're actually a Hindu. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah.
Like maybe that's what it is, and maybe we need to take this as the victory that it is, because to me these practices are very transformative, right? To meditate, to do
Right.
practice, manipulate pranic energy, these are transformative practices, right? And somebody might get into it because he's like, I need to be better as an investment banker doing this,
Right,
right?
right,
But to me, the benefits are going to come out the other end. To me, these are things that are transforming people wholesale.
right,
They have the potential to make better human beings. The way I said it, uh, in Shakti Punch was, hey, it's better that they're burning karmas. They're not going to be burning they're burning more karmas than there are crosses. You know what I
right,
mean?
right.
These practices, right?
Yeah,
Uh, and so that's one way that I think about it is like, well, these are things that are transforming them into better human beings and that are dharmic human beings, right? Dharma is always going to be there. We're going to be there. Hinduism is not going anywhere, right?
right,
For
right,
as much as people want to fearmonger about this stuff, like it's just not. People have been taking shots at us for thousands and thousands of years. And, for whatever reason or another, I'm not the intellectual historian of these things.
right.
We're still standing and we're still growing and we're still proliferating Dharma, right?
And
Uh,
that's interesting because like so many people's fears around this existential threat to Hinduism, and I'm always like, dude, I don't know what you're talking about. It's like there's 100, almost a billion of us out there, and do you think in this day and age with yoga and pranayama and ISKCON and all this stuff globally, do you think we're losing people in any
I
real sense?
I'm so with you on that. I'm so happy to hear another person say that because everybody who's in my like cohort of Hindus is very much I'm the optimist among all of my Hindu friends where I'm like, are you
Right,
kidding me? Like not only is this shit like gonna be around forever, but it's gonna grow because the
right,
practices of it are just too powerful. You know what I mean?
right.
Uh, Even when I hear about people who are doing like Christian yoga or something, I'm like,
Oh,
yeah,
go.
go do your Christian yoga because you know why? Christianity as a philosophical thing cannot withstand actually the transformative power of yoga or pranayama. You know what I
Sure.
mean? These are very powerful. It's not just, and to deny that is to actually operate on the level that this is just exercise. You know what I
Right,
mean?
right.
Like
So
it,
actually, it's funny because like I have said this before too. Is like I don't care if there's 100 Hindus left if they're practicing Hindus. That to me is like the most important thing. Is like why is this number so important? Do we have it's about the traditions have to survive, the ideas need to survive. Whether it survives in Indian people or in other people, I don't care. It's
I mean,
like
dude, isn't our whole thing like our whole thing is very contrary to identity politics? You know what I
right,
mean? We're the people who are about disidentification. We're about the deconditioning of the persona, right?
correct, right,
Experience that state of true of self, of the of Paramatmam, right? Or Parabrahma,
right,
or whatever you want to call it. That's our whole thing, is stripping away this external bullshit,
exactly.
and liberate. That's what liberation is the liberation of identity, you know what I mean? From identity. We're the anti-idpol people, really,
I mean, like Shankaracharya says, "Ma kuru dhana jana yavana garbham hariti nimesha kala sarvam," right? Whether it's your family, your pride, all these things, time takes away like this in a
Yes.
second, right? So why are you focused on these things? He's asking, like, why are you focused on these things that don't matter? Right? This is this is the important thing with all the traditions is yes, you do the dharma that you have to do in your world. Whatever it is, what's your practice or yagyas, whatever you're doing, do that. You have to do it. Focus on that.
Yeah.
But don't give prevalence to any like this attachment to your identity as a father, mother, son, brother, whatever it is. Those are just things, those are duties and roles you do. They're not who you are. These are the
100%.
duties you are.
And
They're not
here's
who you are.
another thing, dude, is like I'm not fluent in Sanskrit. I
Yeah.
can't learn Sanskrit. I don't know
Yeah.
Sanskrit. Does that make me any less of a Hindu than an Indian in India who speaks fluent Sanskrit? No, it doesn't, right?
No.
Likewise, it doesn't make an American any less of a dharmic individual or of a soul, of an atma,
Yeah.
right? If you're talking about pranayama in Western language, right?
Yeah.
And in the language of the West, it just doesn't, you know? And I mean, look, on the counter side of that, language is important, right? Language is everything. Language shapes how we think. Um, it shapes the legibility of our world. It shapes our reality. And so, that's
No,
the whole why
but
Islam is
on this point,
promoting the language of Arabic,
right?
right? Is
But
like
that's
it
the point. You're actually, it's interesting you're bringing this point because there's a Tamil speaker, a Telugu speaker, Malayalam speaker, Bengali speaker that doesn't know an ounce of Sanskrit, but says the mantras in their local languages or does the practice in the local language. Are they less Hindu than, like, say, someone that does. I mean, then you get rid of all the Olivars, you get all of the 9Rs, you get rid of all these people that have contributed so deeply into what it means to be Hindu today.
Yeah. I can't agree with you more, dude. I can't. I mean, it's to me that's the whole thing. This stuff, no matter what tradition you're in, is about
Yeah.
depersonalization. Actually, right? It's a concept. It's a constant process of deconditioning and revealing the true nature of self. And so, yeah, I mean, these people every time they get mad, and man, I when I put that appropriation video out on TikTok, really the knives came out from like
Really?
the like the whole Western like social justice crew of Indians, who are just like, you're so cucked, man, you're so cucked, and like
Really?
you don't practice this shit and you don't give a shit about this shit.
Right.
For you, this is about your own cottage industry that you're trying to be a part of, you know what I mean, of trying to hold on to this thing as if it's your identity when you don't even practice it, you don't even believe in
Right.
it. You're actually out for the complete dissolution of it, actually.
But I fight for all oppressed people everywhere across the world, Even if they don't want it, I'll fight for them.
Exactly. Exactly. Exactly.
It reminds you of this great line in it's the show Peacemaker, where he's like, "I love Pete so much, I'll kill every man, woman, and child in order to." You're like, this is what these idiots are doing. Like, I love social justice so much, I will oppress everyone else to ensure you get social.
I mean, they're so confused. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? They're so confused. They don't know what the practice is about. They just know it's theirs.
Yeah.
That's all that matters. I need to keep it in this box here and stamp it brown person. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's like, fuck up. You know what I mean?
Right.
Just shut up. You're working contrary to the purposes of this practice, which is an anti-id Paul practice as far as I'm concerned. Like, we're getting away from this bullshit, not trying to reinforce it. I'm happy to hear somebody else who's thinks about this in this way, because it's so easy. I mean, I'm the optimist among my cohort in many ways. I'm like, this
Yeah.
shit is this shit's amazing. I love that these white guys are writing books about breath work now, and they're talking about this and that baba that they've read about or they've encountered in India, and that they're taking it forward. These are the Dharmic futurists. You know what I
Right.
mean? You like it or not, the Dharmic futurists out there they're a bunch of Hindus. You know what I mean?
Right.
There are a bunch of Jewish guys who are like, this shit is this is based shit.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, Jai Shri Ram, let's go. They're totally into this shit. I live in New York. One of the temples that I frequent fairly often, the Broome Street Mandir in Soho, it's the guy named Eddie Stern. You know what I mean? And this is the guy who's up there, and he's doing all the mantras, and he's the guy. But he's a white guy. Get over it, guys. Like, these are the Dharmic futurists right here, not the people who are like circling the wagons and jealously trying to protect a knowledge that they're not really even engaging. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, you have to be bold with this shit. This is what the future of Dharma looks like, right? What is the future of Dharma? That it's only going to be Indians doing it? Like, no, that's so close-minded.
And what do you think most of history, like, you think that's all Southeast Asia, that was like Indonesia, they were not Hindus, or Afghanistan, or now we're finding places in southern Russia that are actually Hindu locations. You're like, were they not Hindu because they were white? Like, so what is this issue around, like, this gatekeeping? I think is like around. Some Hindus, I think, is like, we protected this for thousands of years, so therefore we own it. No, you protected it doesn't mean you own it. You protected it. Thank you for your protection. It's meant for everyone else, right? It's meant for everybody. So like this again, this is the problem. Addiction to identity.
Yes.
Just because you protected something doesn't mean that's who you are. That's your duty. You do your duty, and when your duty is done, you move on. Right. This is the whole point of like this. This is why the Dharma is called obligations. It's not your identity, right? So you do your Dharma, you do your actions that you have to do, and then you move on. You don't become attached to those actions. That's the whole point Krishna is saying. He's like, why you become attached to the Vedas, this, that, everything? No, do it. Just do what you have to do. Stop worrying about everything else that's connected to it, right?
Exactly. But this is how the whole thing starts, and this is a story from the Yoga Vashishta, which I love, which is about Dhamma, Vyala, and Kata, these three demons. And well, here's how it starts: is you start making the victories, right? And they start as people who are completely depersonalized because they're actually projections of their demon king, whose name I'm forgetting, right? And so as such, they don't necessarily they're just there to do a job like automatons. But the minute they start, right? They start winning. That's when the ego sense starts to develop, the ahamkara, right? And thus the identification starts happening, the identification with the actions, right?
Mhm.
And that's when they become vulnerable. You know what I mean? When they decide to, when form starts to emerge, right? That's when it becomes vulnerable. We need to be formless. That is our thing, is being formless.
Right.
This is also why, by the way, side note, that I love Taoism as well. I love Taoist
Oh
metaphysics.
yeah.
It's pure Advaita, and I'm loving it, and it's so poetic and it's so beautiful. Um,
You
that
should look into Neoplatonist Christianity and Islam. They're very, very, very cool. They're almost very similar to Advaita, but they're much more Vishishta Advaita type or Beda type, which is there's the one universe all connected and it emanates into all these forms. It's actually pretty cool stuff. But I mean, there's various traditions and things around that. But I wanted to ask you on this other point is so now we've covered a lot of other stuff, like comedy. Like I love what you've done on Mango Bae with you and Usman, where you started even talking about Mahabharata and you started reading it. I know, so
Dharma,
cool.
yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm doing
yeah.
my little Garbapasi operation. Be happy, okay? And bringing him into the identity. You know what I mean?
Oh, you're a covert BJP RSS.
I mean, these fuckers in the comments, dude. Sometimes they have no idea. They're like, "I didn't know Pranav was a Hindu radical." I'm like, "Get fucked, buddy." You know what I mean? Like, being a Hindu is a Hindu radical to people. You know.
Right, right.
And yeah, I mean, like, dude, in terms of comedy, sorry, I cut you off a little bit, but were you gonna?
Yeah, yeah. I said so. How like so you've been now doing comedy for what, like 10 years?
Uh, it, it's gonna be 8 years come 2025.
8 years. So does the Hindu Dharmic background influence your comedy at all? And if it does or doesn't, do you even think about that at all? Do you think about doing when you do like yeah? Give me your process.
Yeah, I mean, in a big way. It doesn't inform my joke writing. If you see
Yeah,
some of my comedy, it's pretty blue. You know what I
yeah.
mean? My comedy is just like, hey, I live in this world. You know what I
Right,
mean? I'm
right,
in this world, things that I think are funny. But my approach to being a comedian is very much informed by Dharma, right? And
okay,
it's very much informed uh, by by the Bhagavad Gita, right? In terms of being the karma yogi, because to be a comedian is a very difficult thing.
yeah,
It is something where uh, it becomes very easy to identify yourself with the fruits of what you do,
right,
right? When you start killing on stage, that ahamkara starts to take hold and you
right,
start feeling entitled to things. You know what I mean? You
right,
start feeling entitled to more and more success,
yeah,
And the fact is that, and this is really in any creative field, but in comedy especially, none of this shit is linear. You know what I mean? Everything is
right,
going like this and like this and like this, and you land up wherever you land up. And the more open I can allow myself to be, the better off I'm gonna be, right?
right,
Because I do comedy because I love being funny. It's intrinsic to who I am. It's my nature, right? To
right,
be a guy, to process reality through humor is who I am. That's who I've been since I've been a small child. And
right,
so I need to honor that by just maintaining that, right? And just
right,
being that rather than worrying about why I'm not getting booked on this or why somebody else got booked on that, which is something very easy for any comedian to fall into, right? Into that
right,
pit. That's where the misery starts to take hold. And why does the misery start to take hold? Because the identity has taken hold,
right.
right? And that's when you become vulnerable, right? You're starting the identity formation is there, and now it's the stones that you're getting pelted by all the slings and arrows of what it means to be in this very fraught, competitive, always changing industry. And so my
Yeah,
approach to it is informed by Dharma in that sense, right?
I
Now,
think
comedy,
it.
as I think about it, is also extremely dharmic because it is that conjunction of pleasure and pain to expose it as all something that's on the same continuum, right?
Well,
And so,
it's one of the rasas, right? The Navarasas is called Hasya, and
okay,
in all Greek, I mean all Hindu Dharmic literature, like if you write literature or novels or whatever it is, there's always a character named Vidushika, right? Vidushika is the commentator who's comedic commentator on everything that occurs. He makes fun of the heroes, he makes fun of the situations. He brings in like when the seriousness is there, he flips it on his head in his commentary. And I
yeah,
think and that's part of the tradition, right? So you're actually doing the dharmic thing of like the hasya connecting to because life is also there's laughter in life, right? This entire emotional spectrum you have to go through. Part of that is the criticality of being critical to oneself when you think about the absurdity of one's own existence and how we behave and act ourselves. That's comedy. That's what comedy does, right? You point out the absurdity of the human condition and our own hubris, and that I think that is so important.
Yeah, I mean that's I mean that was really beautifully said. So in terms of my approach, it's like that's you know that's how I view it. I'm here to observe the world and be part of the
Yeah,
world. And me as a comedian, I'm just a thing that this stuff is happening around me and it funnels through me. And sometimes it comes out as hilarious jokes. Sometimes it comes out as total shit jokes. You know what I
yeah,
mean? Like, it's not for me to determine, right? Like I'm the
right,
best for that, and I have people who are there to help me understand. Well, what should I be saying on stage more often than other things? You know.
right,
But that is what it is, and when you're taking in the totality of experience and reality, it's like, you know, you have to me, to laugh is the most transcendent experience, you know what I
right,
mean? There's no better feeling of laughter, and after I'm done having an amazing laugh about something, it's like I feel like I just did yoga, you know what I
yeah,
mean? I
yeah,
just did pranayama or something, right? Because it's just like I'm light, you know what I mean? There's nothing else that's on me. There's a sort of deep deconditioning of something. Something has been taken off of me, you know what I mean?
you're
I
right,
feel lighter and I'm happier, and that's happening through this gust of air of hysterical laughter, right? That's when I get to laugh and have a good
right,
time. You know, for me, I'm just I think about myself as a comedian as a spiritual act. You know what I mean? And just for my own spirituality, I'm not anyone to go to out on stage making dick
right.
jokes like that. You know what I mean? um, like, but for me, this is
Imagine walking into a Munder and then just making like dick jokes. I'm doing my dharma. I'm doing my dharma.
yeah, exactly. I mean, I don't have like you know the thing. The funny thing is like sometimes I'm like, well, you know, I like being a Hindu comedian, but even then I'm like, well, what the fuck does that mean? You know, I
Right,
happen to be a Hindu and I'm enthusiastic about Hindu practices and Hindu philosophy, but it like, does that mean I have to start making jokes about Hindu stuff? Like, not necessarily for me. It's like, I don't want to force anything, right? And
right,
throughout teachings of like yoga and stuff, it's very much about being non-violent in it. Like, there's an absence of force in the way you go about doing a thing. And
right,
so for me to be in an overdetermined fashion, make a joke that's intentionally about Hinduism, I'm like, that's not going to be the thing that makes me laugh. And thus, it's
right,
not the thing that's going to connect with an audience for me, right?
right,
Uh, so for me, I'm like, part of me is like, I'm playing a sort of waiting game with myself of like, well, when am I going to be able to make jokes about my spiritual path, right? In a way that anybody can connect to. And for me, that's just a waiting game, you know. And the Tao,
it'll
there's a
hit
great,
you.
but yeah,
It'll hit
it'll
you one.
like it's like, do you have the patience to allow the mud to settle and see the reality, see the crystal clear waters, right? And
Right, right,
that's the way I'm kind of like looking at it, you know. Like a lot of Hindu organizations are like, well, wow, this guy's a funny comedian who has a bit of a following, and he's Hindu, you know. So like, let's get him and tell him to come perform at X, Y, and Z event or whatever. And I'm like, sometimes that's challenging because it's like I'm not going to come there and be like, "What's up with prashadam, y'all? Huh? What's up with? Can we stop with the raisins? You know, like stuff like that. You know, it's like,
yeah,
no. What am I gonna? I'm gonna want to do my jokes. You know what I mean?
right,
But it's like it's the thing is though is that it is something that I do want to talk about. I just haven't found the way to do
right,
it.
right.
That's
You know,
not
it's
something.
interesting because there's a few of you guys like you, Rajiv Satyal, and I think there's I know a few other ones, but I'm sure it's. I mean, but you two are the ones I see most Hindu on your sleeves.
But you know what?
Where
Vishnu Vaka, you should check out.
okay,
Vaka, a friend of mine in New York, he's doing really well. He tours with Russell Peters. Um,
yeah,
he's a Telugu guy, he's an Andhra guy, and he talks about Hinduism sometimes, and he makes it funny. You know what I mean? He's
yeah,
from
yeah,
India, and he's a great comic. I love Vish. Everybody should check out Vishnu Vaka. He talks about it quite a bit. But other
that's
than that,
cool.
I don't know who else does actually.
I'll tell you this about those Telugu people. They're very Hindu. You had Raj Kumari on too, and they're just like they're hardcore about that shit.
They're really
Like
into
everyone else,
it.
everyone else was like,
I mean, dude, you look at Bahubali, you know what I mean? The cover of Bahubali is this jacked Hindu guy with a lingam carrying it out of the water. You're like, these guys are really. I mean, my producer on Shakti Punch is a guy, a very brilliant filmmaker named Adi Parige. He has a movie
yeah,
out, a short film called The Luskar. People should try to find ways to watch this movie. It hasn't been released yet.
okay,
Making the festival rounds. Adi is a Telugu guy, and he's like a lapsed Brahmin. You know what I mean? He's like
Catholic.
he's not somebody who goes to the mandir or actually does
Yeah, yeah,
anything at the praxis level, but he like loves it on a cultural level. So he's
right,
read on, and he was raised to know so much. He's
right,
a
right,
big font of information about Hinduism and Hindu culture and Indic culture in general.
right.
And despite the fact that he's not necessarily a practicing Hindu, he loves doing it, and he was enthusiastically ready to jump on this journey with me of doing Shakti Punch together. You know
Oh,
what I
let's
mean?
talk about that actually. So, like, what? So you had Mango Bae. You've been doing that for a long time, which, by the way, everyone should check out. It's hilarious. Yeah,
Mango Bagel.
Pranav and Usmana. They have guests on, over comedians, musicians, artists, whatever, and they
All
just
kinds of.
talk shit for like an hour. It's great shit. It's great. It's great stuff. And then, what made you want to start Shakti Punch? Like, what drove you? I mean, you're doing your comedy full time. You're doing your web series. You're doing the podcast, which I don't think is easy to do. It must be
It's a
relatively
lot.
hard.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know
So
why I decided to throw this on my plate.
yeah.
Well, uh, it's honestly, it was, look, this stuff is such a huge part of my life. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And my learnings, me as a student of Dharma, is a
Yeah.
huge part of my life. It constitutes the totality of my experience, even as a comedian.
Right.
And I found something interesting happening in that as I'm learning and as I'm continuing my studies and my readings and my evolving my practices, right, as a Hindu, I start meeting other Hindus, right?
Hmm.
And uh, a lot of them would be like, when they would realize that I'm interested in Hinduism and that I like talking about it, they would kind of come out of their Hindu closet a
Oh
little bit.
yeah. Yeah.
You know, they'd be like, "Oh, you're into this?" I'd be like, "Yeah." And they're like, "Dude, that's sick." And here's actually all these things that I've been doing when I was a kid, right? They'd be like, "Oh, I used to sing kirtan. I played the harmonium. I'm this and that, and I love the Gita and all this and stuff." But they're not, they don't feel comfortable coming out of their closet with that,
Right.
But they found in interacting with me very happy to, and they love talking about it. And this has happened on so many occasions. And this is with friends of mine in my immediate circle of comedians in New York and other
Hmm.
people in New York. And it also comes out of having conversations with people who are not Hindu or not Indian at all. But, I have a lot of psychoanalyst friends. And I used to belong to a psychoanalytic reading group. And as I'm reading more and
Was it
more,
Jungian?
huh?
Was it Jungian?
No. We were reading everything from Jung all the way up to Lacan, right? Now I dropped out when we started doing Lacan because as a comedian, my comedy stuff started heating up, and I was like, I don't have time for this shit. Lacan is too abstracted. I'm like, this
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
not.
Yeah.
I don't want to. I can't invest the time and the energy. But these are like Kleinians, Freudians, some Jungians, but they're all in
Yeah.
it. Beings. And I'm having conversations with them as I'm reading stuff, right? As I'm reading Yoga Vashishta, as I'm reading the Gita, as I'm reading all
Right.
these,
Right.
and I'm having amazing conversations with them. And I'm like, this is the actual ecumenical dialogue that needs to be happening, is with psychoanalysis and dharmic philosophy and thinking. And they're having an amazing time talking to me about this. And like, hey, I want to read this book that you're talking about. And thus I'm giving them the Gita. I'm giving them God's
Yeah.
song. I'm with our masterful translation of the Gita. I'm giving them the Yoga Vashishta. I'm giving them Nisargadatta Maharaj to read.
Yeah.
And we're having amazing conversations, which are about psychoanalysis and Hinduism and Hindu Dharma and the parallels that are there in the thinking, right? And my girlfriend was really instrumental in this as well, because she's like, listen, this is such a huge part of you, and you talk about it so eloquently, and you love talking about it, and you're passionate about it. Like, why don't you do something with this? And a friend of mine, his name is Vikram Masan. Everybody, he's not a media guy at all, but this is one of the smartest guys I know, the most well-read Hindus
Is
that
he a
I've
lawyer?
lawyer. You must have
I know. I know.
you must follow Vikram. I know he follows you on Twitter.
We were both. We started this organization called Nebia Shastra years ago together, uh, back in the early 2000s. So yeah, I've known him for many, many years. He's awesome, very, very
Vikram
awesome.
is like a guiding light in my life. I love this guy. I can go on. I can go on for probably hours about Vikram, which I'm sure would make him blush and tell me to shut up or something. But one time, pretty recently, this past summer, I was having dinner with Vikram. He was visiting New York, and he was there, and my girlfriend was there, and who's also a Dharmic person. And
Mm-hmm.
Vikram was like, "Dude, why don't you do something with this?"
Right,
Like
right.
media personality is like, "Why don't you do something with this?" And that moment, I was like, "You know what? I'm gonna do it." And within 2 weeks, we dropped the first episode of Shakti Punch. It came together like that. You know,
Yeah,
Adi was on board with it. And I was like, I'm just going to do a very simple thing of whatever I'm learning, I'm just going to be talking about, right?
that's
I've been
smart.
reading Yoga Vishishta. Let's just talk about the Yoga Vishishta, right?
Yeah,
And here and there, I'll give my own little perspective on things that are happening on a kind of cultural or political level or whatever. But really, the main focus of it is to just share what I'm learning with other people and hopefully bring them into it as well. And Adi is an amazing producer. He makes it beautiful, he makes it sound great. And so many talented people, Adi, have gotten involved. A friend of mine, Shona Godkindi, helped me with the typography of Shakti Punch, the logo. And then a brilliant musician, Anand Wilder, who was in a very huge rock band called Yesayer, um, gave me a track. A year ago, I had invited him to a Diwali puja at the Broome Street Mandir, and he started like recording it, things that are happening with their singing bhajans and stuff. And he had just made a track, which he just sat on for a while. And I was like, dude, I want a jingle. He's like, hey, I got something for you. He dropped the Shakti Punch theme song on us. And it all came together through the love. It's an endeavor of love because it's all these people who I love and are super talented guys who have come together to help me make this thing. And that's really how it came together. It came together just from having conversations with people who were kind of becoming enthusiastic about it with
yeah,
me talking about it. And I'm like, well, let's try this. Let's see how this goes. And we've been growing pretty well. We're on the road to getting 1K on YouTube. That's our goal. We want this to be
in
a
a
huge,
short amount of time too, by the way. So
but we're on
that's
our
really
road to
cool.
that. Yeah, we're not there
Yeah,
yet. We're only at like 370 or something on YouTube, but it's like it's slow going. But look, the enthusiasm has been there. It's been contagious. People are finding it. They're loving it. I'm so grateful for that.
yeah.
Um,
I enjoy it a lot. I'll tell you, like, you guys, it's good stuff. I like the style, the commentaries. I like the visuals. You've done a really good job. So
Thank
you
you.
and your team, fantastic.
But so we're really proud of it. We're really proud we're just really proud of a lot of the engagement we're getting, like a
Yeah,
lot of DMs, a lot of really smart comments, and it's coming from people who aren't just Hindus too. Like a lot of like Muslim people are watching it and they'll DM me and be like, dude, I love Shakti Punch. It's great. It's amazing.
yeah,
And the thing is we love holding on to this Hindu Muslim divide as Indians, you know what I
yeah,
mean?
yeah,
Is that people from Bangladesh, from Pakistan, from in Indian Muslims, these are people who are coming out of the fabric of Indic culture. So this is stuff which has a certain legibility for them as well, and that they are intrigued by. They're interested in understanding, well, what are the roots, you know what I mean, behind what it means to just be the brown guy, you know what I
right.
mean? They see it and they're like, hey, this is kind of cool. I wanna listen to this and I want to learn more about this. And thanks for doing it. And it's really rewarding. Random Christian people from Wales or something will DM me and be like, hey, this is cool. And then and it's really rewarding on that level, But first and foremost, this is an opportunity to keep me engaged with my sadhana,
Yeah, yeah,
my duties as a shishya, and that's what it is first and foremost. And I'm glad that it's been contagious to other people, and it's really it's an invitation in, guys, you know what I mean? I'm looking to
yeah,
carry this invitation in to people who maybe have given up on Hinduism, or they don't, for whatever reasons, they're just not engaged with it anymore because it's been a bit too ooga booga in the whatever diasporic culture they, if you're in the UK or America or whatever. Like, I'm doing it for you guys, as well. Is I want you to understand what this is really about. Um Because honestly, Dharma is life, and these are the laws of reality. These are the laws that are governing reality, and we're still revealing more and more and more of it. And I want people on this journey. This is a thing about Dharmic futurism, looking to the future and getting more people involved who can carry this stuff forward. You know, there's a lot of
Yeah.
smart people who are disengaged from it, who have a lot who they can contribute to it. So that's why I'm doing it. That's how I came together.
No, that's so cool. I mean, I totally appreciate that. And I really, again, to all my listeners, all 3,000 small listeners over 6 years or whatever, 7 years, you guys check out the podcast. It's really, really fun. It's really good. I'll put it in the show notes below so you can check it out. But, like, this is the one thing I will say about this Indian or Hindu Twitter, not Twitter space, but the podcast space. It's a small group, maybe like 5, 6 of us max. But like, the idea, at least the ones that actually talk about Hinduism, like your podcast, my podcast, maybe one or two other ones, there's no desire for people to, we're not doing this to convert anybody. We don't want any, we don't care if you come to the religion, don't come. It's like, we want truth. We want you to know things. And then you can go use it, engage with it as you want, but know it from what it should be. Not like,
Yeah.
in this like made up world over here. So I think for us, the biggest thing, at least for me, and you can tell me if you agree, is just like, the goal is not to bring people over or debate or anything. The goal is to let people know there's other ideas, there's other thoughts, there's other beauty out there that you can improve your own life with if you find value in it. So let's put it out there.
Yeah, I mean, I love that. I mean, for me personally, it's about converting as many Muslims and Christians as I can. I get it.
That's
It's no, like I said, like for me, this is just about me learning. You know what I
yeah,
mean? Continuing to learn because, like, look, man, and I'm no one's guru. You know what I mean? Like, I'm purely a shishya. I'm just a student,
yeah,
and so I'm not trying to even teach people. I'm just trying to share what I'm learning, right? Because I'm continuing to learn. This is about accountability to myself, to my own sadhana. You know what I
right.
mean? And I'm trying to uncover the mysteries of reality. And that's what this is about. And it is fascinating stuff. It is so fascinating. And I'm startled every time I turn another page. I am shocked by what I'm learning and I'm
Oh yeah,
delighted by it. You know, I just read in the Yoga Vashishta about Basunda the crow, who's teaching Vashishta about pranayama. It's an immortal crow on Mount Meru who is teaching
yeah.
Vashishta about yoga. I'm like, this looks like an episode out of God of War. You know what I mean? The
It
video
is. It is.
he plays
Or,
that. I'm like, this is
or Black Myth.
Black Myth Wukong. You know what I mean? I'm like, this is amazing. This is like, how can you not love this shit? So for me, it's just about love and just expressing that love of it,
Right.
learning about it, not trying to not trying to stay too crystallized in anything. You know,
Oh
staying
right.
remaining formless, and that's why I want to keep exploring new texts. You know what I mean? New facets of the Dharma that I can learn, and just bringing that to other people. You know what I mean? Whoever finds what I do compelling, great, because it's not about me; it's about what I'm learning. You know?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I know, Pranav, you will probably also have things to do today. But I would love to have you back on at some point when we find time again. I really appreciate your time today. Um, and if do you have any like super poignant thoughts like well you want to end with on your on like your journey, your what the work you do or what you're trying to like what is the goal that you think that you want people to hear about?
And look, honestly, to my goal is to continue to pursue my dharma and to unravel the mysteries of dharma. Right.
Right.
That's the whole thing. Whether I'm a comedian or whatever, whether my jokes are saying talking about dharma or not, like this is part of dharma. You know what I mean? This is part of my dharma, and that's really all I'm trying to do in this life. You know, is
Right.
really try to as studiously and lovingly follow my Svadharma, you know what I
Right.
mean? Svabhava. And try to pursue it. That's really all I'm trying to do here. I don't my goals are, do I have my own ambitions as a comedian? Sure I do. But the
Sure.
more I entangle myself in those things that are outside of me there, like the more dangerous things become. And I do what I do out of a sense of love and because they are part of my dharma. That's why I'm doing them, and that would be what I would want people to my final word to them on. I do want to thank you, Mukunda, for inviting me on your excellent
Sure.
podcast. It's been a blessing. I'm so happy that we're connected. Um, And so I just do want to make sure I can express that appreciation before we
Oh
sign
no,
off.
it's never need to express. This is part of my Dharma. Is I've seen it this way. It's just bring this out. It's really about others, and I'm glad that I get the privilege to learn from all you people and everyone that comes on, and so much knowledge and truth to explore and to
That's what it's
inculcate.
about, dude, because we're
Yeah,
all living under this thing,
yeah,
of reality. We're all living under it, you know what I mean? So
yeah.
the more we can do this learning together, right? To move ahead, to move it forward, to uncover more and more, like that's what it's about, dude.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you, Pranav. We will touch base soon. And everybody, thank you for listening to Meru Media podcast. And thank you so much. And see you later.
Bye.
यमुना तीरे गायति